Hello, we have Dominic Tarr here, and Dominic is going to tell us about what he's doing. Dominic?
So my project is called Secure Scuttlebutt. It is a cryptographically secure gossip protocol. So a scuttlebutt is the cask of water that today's water rations go on in an old sailing ship, and so it's just like a water cooler. It has the same connotations of gossip, and the key thing about secure gossip is that it does not. So regular gossip, I can say, oh, Vinay said that you smelled, and I can just make up shit like that and start rumors.
Yes.
But with secure gossip, unless Vinay really did say that, I can't put words in his mouth. I can only relay them faithfully, because even though you can verify that it really was Vinay or not.
I see. So will it solve the problems that Facebook is currently facing?
No, not necessarily. Well, maybe in some respects, but it's we're talking about a lot lower level than that. But the interesting thing that it does solve is that the way gossip travels, it doesn't need to travel directly. You don't need to. So the current internet is generally built on like a connection-oriented protocol. So
yes.
You have to connect directly to exactly a server. So you have so the thing that sort of characterizes the blockchain world, or what I call cyberspace, which is this new kind of like cryptographic internet, is that you use hashes as links. And so a hash is pointed to what? It tells you, of all the things in the universe, this is exactly what I'm talking about. And if you find that thing, you can verify that that's what you asked for. On the other hand, a URL, a web domain, points to where. It tells you the thing I'm looking for is the thing that's on this server, and then on that server in this location on it. And that means that to get the right thing, you have to go to that server and find that server and then ask it for exactly that thing, and it will give you that thing. And because you have to go to this particular server to find the right thing, that server always has the ability to change their mind about what that thing is.
And the solutions that you're offering, it was presumably not possible pre-blockchain, or
well, it's not
what blockchain role it's playing in your
it's
product?
It's very different from what people generally think of a blockchain. So
yes.
It's not. It uses some of the same primitives that Bitcoin and so on are built from, which is hashes and signatures.
Yes.
But it's probably more inspired by BitTorrent and Git than blockchain per se, because the dramatic difference is, first of all, there's no proof of work necessary. Yes. And so instead of having one global blockchain that everyone can write to, everyone has their own blockchain that only they can write to. So you have a feed that where you can post new messages.
Yes.
And then if I'm interested in your feed, I can replicate them, and then I have that on my computer, and I can replicate someone else and someone else and someone else. So basically, it gives you a data structure that, I was looking around. I wanted to find a way to make decentralized applications, and I was going through a few different ideas and stuff like this, and then I stumbled upon the structure, which is really simple because it's a log you can only append to, which makes it really easy to replicate.
Yeah.
So I can just say, well, on this feed, I'm currently up to this point. Give me everything after that.
Yeah. And
then there are no merge conflicts. Like, we can't have a thing where what do we happen if we see this before that? Because there's a single author to each chain, and it only appends to it. So there's no possibility of conflicts.
So you're saying that you will be in a position to provide information about what someone has ever said publicly on the social media.
Yeah.
But we, as a human beings, also always constructed our social reality. Mm-hmm. And some of this construction is obviously a historical process over the years, but sometimes we use our imagination if we want to impress people, if we want to pretend that we are someone else. So how that would work with your system? Would your system actually stop people from been someone else.
Oh, not at all.
Or
not at all. So there is so the fundamental identity in the system is just a public key.
Yes.
So you can generate on my laptop. I can generate 12,000 public keys a second. So it's although I can, it's basically a pseudonymous system. I can't prove that. No one can prove that this public key belongs to exactly one person, and that a physical body doesn't have any number of public keys. So it doesn't prove that this is a one-to-one thing. Like you'll always basically have the ability to create new identities and run them in parallel. And how much you want to reveal about your physical body as a relation to any particular public key is basically a matter for you to perform, basically.
So it's more a tool to empower people to do something better rather than a constraint in a certain way.
Yeah. Well, it's the following from just before as it was. I was searching for I wanted to build some kind of decentralized application platform. And then I suddenly realized that if I take this really simple structure that gives you a simple solution to the various technical problems, it also happens to map nearly perfectly one-to-one with the structures behind social media applications. So you can build Twitter on this, Facebook on this, LinkedIn on this, dead easy.
Very interesting. Yeah. Can you give us one very good example, a use case, how this system will work in reality?
Well, we have a couple of prototypes that use it currently. Yep. There's Patchwork, which is basically like Facebook. Yes. You can there's like a forum kind of thing, and you can follow people, and there's private messages and public messages, and we use that to discuss the development of Secure Scuttlebutt and other technology around it and issues and philosophy around it and stuff like this. But that's where the community meets, is on the protocol. Then there's a Git backend, so you can do Git over Secure Scuttlebutt.
Yes.
And there's basically backend, so you can push Git repositories onto it. That's for code version tracking for any non-coders in the watching.
So what is the actually impression and what feedback are you getting from people who are not programmers when they start to interact with your system?
Well, like any fledgling technology, we are getting we're trying to, these things can sometimes be a little more harder to install and use, but we're trying to make it as simple as possible. It's fairly straightforward. You don't really have to know about cryptography to use it. There might be a few questions people have, but if they can use Facebook, they can more or less figure this out.
But if we generalize not only about your system, but about blockchain technology in general, do you believe that population has to be educated about what blockchain is and what it does?
Well, yes, but I think they are totally able to do that. For example, if you compare it to cars. So when cars were developed, nobody tried to make a car that had the same interface as a horse and cart.
Yes.
They were the first owners of cars had to be mechanics basically, and they had to understand there's a steering wheel and there's a throttle, and to be able to start your car reliably, you actually had to know quite a bit about it.
So you see a blockchain technology as a car, not as a combustion engine within the car, because, for example, not many people know how the engine works.
Well, maybe the engine is the blockchain, and the car is the app.
Yes.
But I think, growing up, my dad had cars and did his own work on cars, and even as a child I was exposed to not directly from him, but just from the ambient world of explanations about how engines worked, and I didn't mean I could take an engine apart and put it together, but I could draw a cartoon of
So you still know that there is an engine that
that there's an engine, and you know some of the things about the engine as well. So you don't have you don't need to know everything about it. You just need to know the essential things about how you interact with it.
Yes.
So you know that this lever makes it stop and this lever makes it go. Even on a website, on the web, you know that if you copy whatever it says in this bar,
yes,
and then put it into an email, they can click on that and then go to that place.
Yeah.
Like, it doesn't. They don't. And it's like relatively opaque. You don't necessarily be able to read all the things in there,
yes,
but that you can copy the
sure,
thing
sure,
is enough knowledge. And if the website seems to stop working, like hit refresh. There's like a few things like that you basically
yes,
need to know.
Do you believe that blockchain technology is neutral? Do you believe that it can be used in different ways? But in essence, the technology itself is neutral, and it's up to us, humans, people, how we use this technology.
Sure. Well, when you're developing, a lot of people that are developing technology, myself included, have some kind of utopian vision that motivates them.
Yeah.
And in actual history,
yes,
actual of things like previous technologies that have been developed,
yes,
do these utopian visions work out?
yeah,
Sometimes I think, and usually by the time you actually get to the thing succeeds, the reality might be a bit more banal than we'd hoped. Like, would the Wright brothers have been so motivated to invent flight if they knew known you'd have to take your shoes off to go through security, and that everyone would just be pulled to death?
Well, that's a very interesting example, absolutely. So, but we still need those utopian visions in order for innovation to progress.
Definitely. But I think it's also very important to remind yourself that we don't actually know what will happen, and that when it starts to be successful, people who are trying to turn it to their own ends will arrive, and I guess you need to be prepared for that. And also, it's should admit that your utopian vision might end up being impressive.
Yes.
In the sense that, like, if we look at in like a few hundred years ago, people that thought monarchy was a bad idea were meeting in secret and discussing like reason and science and stuff like this, and plotting revolutions, and in clubs like the Bavarian Illuminati, which you can read about on Wikipedia. Wikipedia is, and the fascinating thing about reading about the Bavarian Illuminati on Wikipedia is it's so boring. Like, it's just full of boring details, and you're like, well, this is obviously stuff that I don't think they didn't like worship Satan actually. That like the conspiracy theories aren't true, but they did actually exist, and they did have to meet in secret because they were against monarchy,
yes,
and against the church, and but they were basically just a hackerspace.
Yeah. So how innovation works for you? So you told me a little bit about your father, about
mm-hmm.
where you're coming from,
mm-hmm.
how it's all started. But on the daily basis, how do you actually innovate? What does it mean for you, innovation?
There's a lot of there's different layers of motivations, and
yes,
you have this the big picture. You might have this utopian sci-fi vision of like what the world would be like if this certain thing exists. But on a day-to-day basis, to be motivated to do that, it actually has to be fun. You have to solve challenging problems that are interesting in and of themselves. Before the Secure Scuttlebutt idea fully formed, I had done a lot of like open source. I published a huge number of open source, like hundreds of open source modules that were basically, computer programming is kind of addictive in the way that you're constantly there's a never-ending supply of like interesting technical problems to solve, and then if you can solve it in a better way, or make it faster or more elegant, or somehow more clever or something than the previous person to solve that problem, then that's sort of it's like it's addictive actually.
So is it technology which is interesting for you, or things that you can actually do with this technology?
Well, both of those things. On one level, it's kind of this like exploratory questing thing,
yes,
where like you can't like physically explore the world anymore. That's basically been done, but you can still do things that have never been done before. And this like crypto internet, this cyberspace is, I think, one of the really exciting things in this, and that hasn't been done before.
Yeah.
And if you go and you have the chance of like exploring this space first, and then naming the things you find, and then drawing the map to get to those things, and that's exciting. And kind of a mid-level in between those two other extremes.
So when you say about the map, about the future, maybe you can give some overview about where you want to be, how you see your application working in the future, and maybe some idealistic utopian scenario.
Yeah, so we are trying to be, fully decentralized, be more decentralized than all of the other decentralized things. So like I argue that your typical blockchain like Bitcoin and stuff might be decentralized at an infrastructure layer, but it's conceptually centralized. It's logically centralized because there's only one blockchain. Secure Scuttlebutt tries to completely avoid any centralization, and so far apart from the fact that it's a small group of people that are working on it, and that there's one protocol that you have to agree to use it. It doesn't require any what I call global singletons.
What about things like resilience, security, and then accountability of data? Something that you have to think about.
Those are the simple things actually.
What is hard then? What is difficult?
Well, the hard thing is you need to like train yourself to think in a new kind of way. So because we've avoided any global singletons, so you get things like this. You get like this. Many nerds are quite enamored with the idea of like objective truth and stuff like this. And there's actually a pretty narrow scope of life where you can actually point to things and say this is objective truth. And on the whole, life is mostly a subjective matter. But if you are too enamored with the idea of objective truth, then you go and build things that appear to be objective truth, but are actually just privileged subjectivities. So for example, Google search. There's a single one answer that it gives you, and because there's only one Google, you could be forgiven for thinking that this was the objective truth.
So in a way, the systems that you are developing is more person-centric in a way?
Yeah, it's like you are your own trusted authority. So one thing that if you using it that you'll first encounter is that we have a pet name system. So because there's no global structures, we can't have a globally unique usernames. So you go on and you're like, this is what I call myself, and then other people can choose to call you that or not. And when they interact with you, if they like mention you like on Twitter, it basically creates an association between the name that they use to refer to you and your public key. And so it builds up evidence that this feed calls that feed this name, but there's no like global registry of who owns what name. It's not something, your name isn't something that you own, it's something that people give you.
So this identity that you create, you can potentially start over again, so you have multiple identities.
Oh yeah, sure, of course.
So we already have them. How that would be different if you have those kind of identities on blockchain systems that you are developing?
Well, that's the part that isn't really that different, because it's easy to create Twitter parody accounts and stuff. I think the thing where it does become more interesting is that since we've decentralized the data layer, it means that just because I created the system doesn't mean that I can control how you use it.
I see.
It's impossible. A few years ago, there was basically a battle for the Twitter ecosystem, and Twitter closed off and said no one else is allowed to create Twitter clients anymore. And they could totally do that because it was centralized. But by making a decentralized thing, my main adversary is my own future self. What if future Dominic turns evil and tries to take over the world? Well, I've built a thing that will stop him from doing that. So you will always be able to make a third party, like another user interface or other thing, build other things on top of it.
Yes.
And I can't stop you. So if someone creates more value than me, ultimately, in the thing, I just have to. I have to deal with that. But better, I think, is that I should embrace this possibility and encourage it.
So very interesting applications in terms of the social media, but also, in my opinion, it can be used for ID management, and it can potentially stop something like homicide, and where you would be in possession of who you really are. Is it something that is achievable on your system as well? But you can actually shield your own self from the world, so that people don't know your real identity, but then still being able to interact with the outside world.
Yeah.
Because we've seen example in the past when people have been targeted just because they possessed a specific features or specific identity. And system like yours might be one of the systems that can potentially solve that problem in the future.
That's of course a very high stakes big deal. So I can't be like simply say it's the and you can't really get everyone to adopt a thing because of like you adopt this and it will save you from this exponential threat that probably won't happen. Probably. Or at least it's like so far it's so scary you don't want to talk about it. You need to make something that does that, but also is useful day to day. Because then people will be motivated to actually.
It also depends how this adoption happens. So if it happens on individual levels, then maybe it can be used for social media, some other applications. But if we need broader adoption, then probably it would be more from the government or maybe international organizations to kind of see how the system can be used.
I think,
but that's not something that you're developing. You're developing a tool for individual. Am I right?
It's fundamentally it's a protocol. It's a database with a protocol. It's a protocol with a database.
Yes. So are you actually building an app, or this is a protocol, or it's just a protocol and you want to build an app?
Well, we need to. We develop apps as well to test the ideas in the database. So they both go hand in hand. It wouldn't be useful to you have to feel your way around to do this thing, because you can't just imagine what it will be like and implement that stuff.
Yes.
When you actually try to use it, you discover you actually missed things, or that wasn't actually how you ended up doing it. So it has to develop that hand in hand with how it's being. What
are the biggest challenges that you face? Is it technical challenges? Is it the adoption challenges? What is it?
Well, it's probably just that by the time you sort of, you have the science fiction idea and you start working on it, and then it starts to work, and then people get interested in it.
Yes.
And it's just that there's so many details. There's just like, how do you solve this subproblem and all these kind of things. And it's just like, once you start actually doing it, it's like, the idea is simple, but the actual creation of a thing is not necessarily simple in it.
Yeah. Is it a creative process, or it's more sort of technological programming? What is it for you?
Oh, well, those are the same. Those are usually the same.
For you, it's the same.
Yeah. I mean, the technical creation of technical systems are a little bit more objective, in the sense that there are often more definite criteria about that you can use to judge whether something is a good idea or not. Like, you can just measure, is this way of doing it faster than another way? Is this way of doing it more efficient than another way? And actually quite a lot of, because it's for humans to use, quite a lot of what we do is like needs user interfaces. And user interfaces are nearly entirely subjective.
Yes. So efficiency is something that you can actually show on paper, it's numbers.
Yeah.
But in your case, people have to understand the idea, and they have to see the reasons why they would use your app, your blockchain for something that they want. Yeah. And that's a bit more difficult.
Yeah, well, at the moment, it's something that it's like, I personally don't try to sell the idea to like everyone I meet on the street.
Yes.
I try to find the people that are really ready to receive the idea.
Yep.
And there's still quite a lot of people out there who've been thinking about like, I think Bitcoin really, the thing that really excited me about Bitcoin is I saw Bitcoin and I was like, oh, I'm not sure if I like the idea of Bitcoin as itself, but I was really excited that suddenly it brought all of these people out of the woodwork that are now going to take the Bitcoin idea and just experiment with it and try to build other things. And a lot of those things are terrible ideas. A lot of those things are scams. But some of the other things are really interesting. And of this like fertile bed of experimentation, some of the things will be really great ideas that will be incredibly successful.
So as you said, there are many ideas and many projects which are running in parallel. Mm-hmm. Do you believe in cooperation or competition? So what would be the driving force of innovation, for example, in the blockchain? Not necessarily talking about your project, but in general.
In general.
What is your belief?
I think that cooperation is much more of let's say collaboration, which can be exists somewhere in between the spectrum of competition and cooperation.
Yes.
For example, you might have like a kind of friendly one-upsmanship where it's like I create some work of art or something like this, and then you go and be like, use some ideas inspired by mine, and then try to create a better work of art.
Yeah.
And we're sharing ideas at the same time as we're trying to raise the bar. It's not strictly like a battle to the death, but it's not working exactly together to create the same thing either. So I try to have like, there's other people working in similar spaces as well on related ideas, and I try to be in communication and friendly communication with these people. And like I think you should encourage other people's ideas, and you should talk up other people's projects when it is related. Like I don't think a zero-sum way of thinking is helpful.
And in this case, there are different kinds of cooperation. You can cooperate with the peers, with other startups, as well as with corporations. And we can see that many startups are actually going that route. So they would be running POCs with large corporations, or they would be even getting investment from those corporations. Do you think it as a positive or as a negative signal for the industry? And the reason why I'm asking is that, don't you think and it's just my opinion, when you have big company supporting a startup, and startup is trying to meet expectations of that big corporation, they just basically supporting the status quo. They're not really trying to innovate, trying to introduce the change which is needed for general population.
Well, but the corporation isn't trying to...
Well, I mean, I'm not necessarily saying that corporation is evil, but obviously the existing structures and they're using their power to perform certain types of activities. And if a startup which is trying to innovate, trying to help those companies to do something that's already doing, using a new technology, so to do something that's already doing but to do it better, isn't it true that they're just supporting the status quo rather than trying to disrupt and innovate in a truly new way?
Well, maybe in some respects, but I think in some respects it's also the other, where the opposite of that, where the startups are basically feeding off the corporations. Because I think to quite a large extent the corporations go into these things not because they need it, but because they heard it was really cool. And there's this hype, and they don't really understand what it is, but they don't want to be left behind just in case it is a thing. So
do you believe it's just a hype, or maybe they already see a potential in this technology and they want to exploit this technology in the way they see it for themselves?
The problem is it's very hard to, like, I can imagine all of those possibilities, but it's very hard to tell in any specific example whether or not they know what they're doing, or they really benefit from that. But one thing is that the best work I've done in my professional career, of what part of it you could call professional, was generally when the boss was on holiday.
I see. Interesting.
And some of those things was like, I previously asked to do this thing.
Because you did something else, or is it because you are not controlled?
It's about risk. So if you're like, I want to do this thing.
Yes.
And the boss is like, oh, well, that seems like it might be a good idea, but it might not work out. Actually, we shouldn't do that thing because we just need to generate billable hours and you'll waste time doing this.
Yes.
He goes on holiday, do it, it works, and then they're like, oh, what a great idea, after the fact. But you took the risk. If I had spent a week working on a crazy idea when my boss was on holiday, he came back and it failed, and I was like, oh, I didn't achieve anything, I would take the fall for that. And the thing is, when you have like good ideas, if they're really going to turn out to be good ideas, have to start out looking like bad ideas. Because if you could convince everyone that this good idea really was a good idea, it wouldn't be a good idea, it would be an obvious idea. And obvious ideas, if they haven't succeeded already, are probably bad ideas.
So I believe that's why you decided to become an entrepreneur, so you can have your own judgment in terms of what the risk levels are and what you should or shouldn't do.
Yeah.
What would you recommend to people who want to start programming, developing something on a blockchain, or starting their own blockchains, or building the apps?
I think it's you can teach yourself. Depending on how you can, the best programs I know all taught themselves to program at some point. Like, find an idea that you really want to happen, and then figure out what you need to do it. It really should be a thing where, like, you feel that because of your personal, like, situation and history, that you are like the one person on earth who can create this thing. If it is the thing that's like, because if it's a thing that's really obvious that loads of people are working on.
Do you need any third-party reference, third-party confirmation for your idea at the early stage? Or is it just you as an entrepreneur who have to stick to your idea and truly believe in it?
Oh, well...
Do you have to ask friends, for example?
Don't ask your friends, because they will just be like there's not much of a confirmation. It doesn't really confirm it if your friends like the idea. Yes. Because they'll probably, like, this was my mistake early on, is I asked my friends, and they would sort of smile and nod, and were kind of like, they knew I was crazy already, so they were like, oh yeah, it sounds interesting. I don't think it's important, you don't need to convince everyone.
Yes. But
if you have some true believers that like get onto your idea, then that's, I think, the best thing. In terms of, previously I worked on another idea that's too complicated to explain.
Yes. And
basically no one really, it was very hard to find anyone who was into that idea, and it was like, this isn't going anywhere. Maybe it's ahead of its time. Yes.
But when you start to get traction, start to get users, or maybe your system becoming more known, what is the best way to validate your idea? Is it the users that you get? Is it the investors that invest? Or how do you actually validate your idea at the later stage?
Well, the way I evaluate whether ideas are working from open source projects to philosophical ideas or whatever, is like the grassroots support. It's like, are people freely choosing to engage with this thing? Yeah. So this is the problem with enterprise software. Yes. For example, enterprise software is often not very good. And I think because basically salesman from the vendor company goes and loses at golf to the manager of the client company, and he's like, oh, you're a good guy, I'll buy your software, and then the people that actually have to use it have zero say. Yeah. So that's like, and if you have some good salesman, it's easy to sell to enterprise. Yeah. But if you have if people can freely choose to use something or not, then it's a lot more of a confirmation. So it's like, don't ignore what people say about themselves and pay attention to what other people who aren't being coerced or rewarded in any way say about the thing.
Very interesting. And you also said about corporations the way you see it, but there might be different views out there, and companies might be trying to copy you in the future. Mm-hmm. So how do you see that if someone tries to copy your system, do something very similar to what
I hope they don't. It is like, it's open source, there's a bunch of code there, please take it and build something with it. Personally, I'm looking forward to one day no longer working on it and just going sailing. If I wouldn't have succeeded in creating a decentralized technology if I end up running it, like being like, you know, on some big throne or at the helm in 10 years. So I've got other ideas I want to work on as well. So I'm looking forward to not doing this. And I think that, you know, with like if you write a great book of literature and people are still reading it 100 years later, that's great. You've tremendously exceeded. But if you write a piece of software and people are still running it 50 years later, that's not a success. That's a curse.
So you said that in the future you would like to do something else.
Oh,
so maybe writing a book or what?
Oh well, or just what, you know, maybe who knows, but other, but also other like software ideas.
I see.
We'll have to do another interview to talk about
Absolutely,
the things I want to do later. But just the...
So can you tell me, what do you need to get the traction so your system can be used widely?
Well, there's still, I think, you never really know. It's always like a matter of like, you know, it's the thing that you can kind of see coming of what do I need to do to like get the next 10 times the amount of people I have now.
Yes.
And we're around about the like 1,000-ish people who have installed.
How are you getting people on board? How do you actually acquire them?
Just word of mouth. Yes. Or my approach isn't to do mass marketing, but to kind of like influence the influencers.
Yes.
Then they can tell everyone else. That's just my personal approach. So the things I'm working on now is ways to make the system more. So we're not really having a problem with the technical scalability, but the social scalability. So like at the moment we have public messages and private messages. And private messages can be up to like 7 people, but it's just like a Twitter DM, and public messages which are like for everyone.
Yeah.
And this kind of creates this kind of main street effect where where it's hard to like go off and create your own community.
Yeah.
And people feel intimidated to post when like everyone's going to see this.
Yes.
So we are working towards having a way so you can like sort of on the scale, you know, if you have the privacy spectrum, one end is living alone in a cave and the other end is walking down the street naked. And Secure Scuttlebutt targets the middle of the spectrum, which is where most people actually live. I feel like most like crypto privacy research is dedicated towards this end, is like how do we make something that's ultra private and try to make something that's like has a range of privacy settings but is useful.
I see.
And we have these kind of like 2 ends of this thing, and I'm going to try to fill in the middle gaps so that you can have something that's like relatively private, but it's like you and your friends or your family, or like a club you're in, or like your local community or something can have a thing.
What is your actually view on privacy? Is it something that we have to maintain? Is it something which is given by default, by government, or is it something that we have to protect? I mean, especially future-wise, because we have social media, we have mobile devices. Do we actually have to protect our boundaries, our borders?
Well, since cryptography exists, I think privacy is actually a straightforward technical problem.
Yes.
You can make, currently states are making imaginations about being against this, but I think it's ultimately very foolish because they have a worse privacy problem than we do.
What about social hacking? I mean, do you believe it's a bigger threat than...
There's no way I'm going to be able to solve that. I mean, people have always, but we can prevent people from like turning like a tool you own into a listening device.
Yes.
Or being able to learn things about you from observing what you do over there. But I think the other thing is like we call it free speech, but I think really when free speech became a concept, it was actually free press. It was that people were handing out political pamphlets and stuff like this.
Yeah.
And nowadays with just the web, it's basically a solved problem. There is so much speech, and speech is so cheap. Occasionally, like Facebook or Twitter, like maybe censors someone or something like this, but it's not.
Yeah.
It's not the same as the government throwing you into prison.
Yeah.
It's like you get kicked off Twitter. Whoop-de-doo. It's like there's a million other things you can communicate.
Well, probably can feel as bad for some people.
Yeah, well, no, I don't think anyone is actually dying because they've been kicked off Twitter.
Not. Yeah.
So even if like politically Twitter is compelled to censor people like that,
yes.
It's not really a big deal. It's not on the one hand, it's like actually surveillance is worse problem, in terms of like political danger,
yes.
And abuse is a big problem. And I think abuse is that you reframe it as like basically speech, like writing is easy, but freedom of listening, I think, is the next thing.
Yes.
Is like actually protecting yourself from online from people that you don't want to, that are just trying to hurt you.
Yeah.
Is not a big problem for me, but I can recognize it's definitely a problem for other people. And the way that decentralized platforms approach this is very heavy-handed,
yes.
like top-down thing that is basically like Facebook simply isn't situated such that it can enforce community standards because it's not a community. If they created tools that your community could use to enforce its own standards, every community in history has its own tribal law, and each tribe has different laws, and on the internet the neat thing is like you can be part of multiple tribes and move between them and join new ones relatively easily.
Yes. So what you're saying is that your system actually gives those tools not only to individual but to community to be able to kind of solve some of the problems in terms of the privacy versus the identity.
Forces us to think towards this
yes.
thing. So you can have, since I think like internet abuse is a problem, but we can't, because it's decentralized, we can't solve it in a centralized way.
Yeah.
So we have to create tools where a community can choose its own way of moderating itself, which could be you could appoint moderators, or you could block people, or you
yes.
could sympathetically block people that someone else has blocked. So if there's
yep.
members of your community that you think need extra support, you could be like, I'm going to back up whatever you. I
yes.
opt to back. I will back
yes. up
whatever you are having a problem with. But I think the one thing people always ask me is like, oh, can you delete anything? And I'm like, no, there is simply no delete. It's just too hard to do that.
Yes.
But I eventually.
So it's all about creating your identity if you've sort of failed with the previous one.
I think there's delete doesn't really exist anyway.
Yes.
But what's better than delete, I argue, is apologizing. People don't apologize for things enough these days, and we'd probably be better off if people.
So do you have this a special button, apologize, in your system?
No, but we've talked about that. I mean, some of these things that we've talked about.
Yes, that's an interesting concept there. Yeah. Because social media is all about arguing rather than being apologetic.
Seems like a wacky idea, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely, yes. Well, it also depends on the societies that you implement this idea first. Maybe some societies would be more receptive to this idea than the others.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
So where do you see your system starting off first? Which country, which region is going to be global from the beginning? Or maybe it's more well suited to a certain region?
Well, right now it's basically the community is a variety of ranging from privacy or decentralization enthusiasts or activists, and
yes.
Then to some like blockchain people and stuff like this. So, but the other sort of angle where it becomes really interesting is because it's a gossip network, you don't need to communicate, you don't need to receive anything directly.
Yeah.
So it actually, and gossip, like I can come and talk to you, and then I can go and see a mutual friend and I can tell them something, and then they can meet you and pass information that way. You don't ever have to have a direct connection.
Yes.
So it actually still works even if there's no global infrastructure.
Yeah.
And if you have to travel around, which is called a sneaker net,
yeah.
it still works. And sort of one of the things that led me to this problem was growing up in New Zealand, where the internet is very high latency. Like the best it ever got on my parents' farm was satellite internet, two-way satellite internet. That's 1 second latency. So, which is actually the same as you'd have if you lived on the moon. So I sort of don't assume that good internet will just arrive next year. It's like we're kind of stuck like this, being the other side of the world, and I sort of see no internet as the default. And when some internet appears, that's a glorious thing. But it led me to try to design systems that work without internet. So you have a local database and it totally works and it's responsive and stuff like this. You never wait for a spinner while you're using it locally. And then I can go, so even in the zombie apocalypse, all the national infrastructure dies, it will still work. You'll just have to go from your house to someone else's Wi-Fi, and messages will still be able to propagate like this.
It's like a mesh network in a way.
Yeah, it's totally a mesh, and you could even get the data, put it on a SD card, attach it to a pigeon or drone, and then fly it over a mountain. And most of the people in the world are already living in conditions that Westerners would regard as the zombie apocalypse.
Yes.
And there's a lot of so in India, for example, they have a lot of people, everyone has cell phone. Cell phones are still really hugely common because really actually cell phones are really cheap.
Yes.
And they have 3G data, but they just can't. Infrastructure exists, but they just can't afford it. So even if you have having 3G might a megabyte. I think most people live who have internet live on 80 megabytes a month. Whereas Western probably could. I can live on 6 gigabytes a month. That's a lot more.
Yeah. Well, I have 10 gigabytes on my mobile device.
Yeah.
Obviously, I'm never using it to the end. I'm not watching movies or anything like that, so quite low user in that regards.
Well, even doing all of the coding and stuff I need to do.
Yes.
Through my phone, I go for about 5 or 6, maybe 7. So it's I'm not watching YouTube and stuff like this, but I survive like that. And so the interesting thing about this is you can. It's a network that works totally well in those kinds of conditions. So I feel that, and Facebook and Google and stuff are trying to get into this is where the emerging markets, this is where the opportunities for growth are, because everyone in the West already has, or is already using the service. So here is there's a really big opportunity here that we can attack in Facebook's blind spot, because they're trying to make these flying drones and stuff to bring internet in.
And also you say using the service, don't you think that because you kind of creating this new type of system, that the biggest part of how the system would be used would be mostly socially constructed, so it would be up to people to decide and find the best use cases for your system.
Yep. And given that anyone can build a user interface on top of it, you're basically empowered to just build things. And personally, I totally expect that I won't be the one who builds the killer app on top of it.
Yes.
I'll just build a few demonstration prototypes. And this is the thing with the killer app, with the killer app that makes the network. That this is why people come to the system, is to use this one thing.
Yes.
And no one can predict which thing is going to be the killer app.
Yeah.
To get to the killer app, you need to have an ecosystem. It's made by an ecosystem, not by an individual, really. One individual might end up taking all the credit, but it's actually it's a group process where a whole bunch of people trying different ideas and experimenting, and one of them is a huge success, and then there's this like backwards mythology that says that like they were the chosen one.
Do you believe that there are any problems in the crypto community or the blockchain communities that have to be solved before we can actually be truly disruptors? Maybe we should agree on something, or is there any other issues? What do you believe?
Well, of course, I'm going to answer that question to say it's the things that Secure Scuttlebutt cares about, which I think is like it's coming from a totally left field perspective with respect to the rest of the blockchain world, and that it's sort of like mainly that it embraces subjectivity instead of trying to make it a single global.
So basically, by embracing subjectivity, you're increasing the power of human agency, and obviously in duality of relationship between human agency and institution, which is an interesting concept.
Yeah, I think a lot of the kind of institutions we have are basically organizational structures based on writing and paper.
Yeah,
and so like before, like, you know, there's economics and commerce and stuff like this, and before that people would just like have like a tribal community who would just more or less share things, maybe trade with other tribes, basically do whatever they felt was right at the time. They'd have like their own culture and stuff like this, but they would basically owned things in commons, and not really as in like a strict property system about everything. And the great thing about that system is there's no bookkeeping, which is a killer feature if you haven't invented writing yet. If you invent writing, then you can create like scalable hierarchies. But you can't do. But basically, that's the only thing that you can create if you have to have like a bookkeeping class of like priests or scribes or something who are tracking everything. And with Secure Scuttlebutt, you can kind of take the best of both of those worlds, where computers assist with tracking information, but don't require it to be strictly hierarchical. So there's I think lots of ways where humans function best in that kind of like tribal culture environment, where you see even like bankers. If you listen to what bankers actually say, it's like they're totally operating on trust within the other bankers, and they might rule the world, but within their sphere, they just see themselves as the banking community.
Well, definitely very interesting concept. It's very different from what I have seen in crypto space and in blockchain. What is interesting for me is that it actually empowers the individual. It gives more rights of choice, what to do with identity, how to behave, even to start from the scratch, to create a new identity. And I believe that is really empowering, something which is helping individual to be what they really want to be in this life. And I'm sure that there will be many use cases how people would use and adopt your system, and that's something that we will have to watch for. And thank you very much for this conversation.
Thanks
real
for
pleasure.
Cheers.
Thank you.